Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Our next session, I'm excited to have Adrienne Dreyfus from Stripe's Developer Relations team talking to us about how they think about creating world-class developer experiences. So please take it away.
Thanks for coming out, everyone. I know it's already into the afternoon, so I hope you had your coffee and your food trucks. But I'm actually going to start off with a question for you all. This is the only work you'll have to do the entire session, I promise you. Two questions. One, just out of curiosity, how many people in this room are developers, whether professionally or recreationally? Raise your hand. Oh, that's actually more than I thought I was going to get, so I'm glad I asked that question. My real question, though, is unrelated to that, more related to my talk, and that is, how many hours a week do you think developers spend debugging old code instead of working on new features or functionality? Take a second to think about that number. Some developers are going to have more empathy than others. Okay, raise your hand if you think it's more than 5 hours a week on bad code. Okay, keep them up if you think it's 10, 15. Interesting. Okay, you can put your hands down. I ask that because this year we partnered with Harris Poll to survey thousands of companies and try to understand the developer's role in an organization. And we found that developers reported spending an average of 17 hours a week maintaining legacy systems, working on old code. And if you think about that in the context of your average 40-hour work week, that means a developer is spending almost 50% of their time just keeping the boat afloat. And as an API provider, Stripe wants to make sure that not only do we never add to this number, but we actually want to make products that bring this number down. Our mission as a company is to grow the GDP of the internet. And we do this with a set of products and APIs that help businesses of all shapes and sizes grow online. So we actually have over 1 million businesses processing billions of dollars through our API. You can imagine if we added even an hour a week of friction to the developer experience, this would take away millions of hours a week to global workforce productivity and not help us get to our mission of rapidly increasing GDP online as fast as we can. So not only does developer experience fit within our mission as a company, it's also central to our products. Now, I promise, this is my last question. Raise your hand if you work for a company that accepts payments online, even if you don't use Stripe. Yeah, this is a very common problem, and it's one that we're trying to solve so that developers can focus on the features and tools that they actually want to build and not have to worry about payments infrastructure. It all starts with what we call our Global Payments and Treasury Network. This is the work of managing compliance, regulation, partnerships with banks and credit card networks, and we let developers leverage this network through a suite of APIs, ranging from payments, where developers can make payments online, to billing that manages subscriptions and invoices. Connect is our platform for marketplaces. And increasingly, we actually find ourselves having to design APIs that interact with the physical world. We just launched Stripe Terminal, which is our solution to let companies accept in-store payments using their own custom point-of-sale platform. And Stripe Issuing, that lets developers programmatically create and manage real live credit cards, like the ones that I have right here, all with an API. And all these products together mean that we receive over 200 million API requests per day that are coming into our servers. Broken down, that's 10,000 API requests per second coming in globally from all around the world. And these aren't your average, everyday, normal API requests. They often have very business-critical functionality. Let's take a charge as an example. With this single API request, you are creating a real, live $20 charge on someone's credit card. And while this looks really simple and straightforward, and this request is, the world of payments is anything but. At Stripe, we accept over 140 different currencies across dozens of local payment methods and countries, all within a single unified integration. And while payments on credit cards have always been our bread and butter, these days we're finding increasingly that more and more online transactions are made with a payment other than a credit card. This is the world that our developers face and the reality that we need to design our APIs around. As companies scale globally, they need to look locally and accept the local payment methods that are popular in their new markets. Germany is a great example. Only 22% of online purchases in Germany are made using a credit card. On top of that, the other 80% is fragmented around another half dozen different payment methods. So you could see if you wanted to go into Germany, you would need to accept at least 3 or 4 of these payment methods right off the bat. And this puts a big strain on developers within a company because they have to write the code and maintain the integration for each of these payment methods across the board. And developers don't want to have to go and rewrite existing payments infrastructure the same way they turn to Twilio so they don't have to rewrite existing communications infrastructure. And not only do they have to do the work to create and maintain each of these integrations, but these payment methods have differences and nuances that developers have to account for. Let's take a card as an example, a credit card. You can collect the payment details of a credit card, charge it, receive the funds instantly. Other payment methods like SEPA Direct Debit, which had around 23% of the German market, there's a delay of up to 14 days before you can receive your charge sometimes. And now there's a whole set of payment methods that require an additional step of customer authentication, which is great because it helps cut down on fraud, but it's difficult for developers because it involves a whole other part of the flow, and if it's done correctly, it can lead to a poor checkout experience, and you could risk losing a customer. An example of this is Ideal, which is the most popular way to pay in the Netherlands. It requires redirecting a user to their bank account, have them put in the details or verify with a QR code before being redirected back to the customer's website. So at Stripe, we looked at all of these popular payment methods and kind of saw that they fit into a single unified integration and felt like this was a place where we could really help make developers more productive by doing some of this work for them. And that's how we ended up creating the Sources endpoint. With Sources, instead of having to create and maintain these separate integrations across the pay methods, they just have to integrate once with Stripe and worry about their Stripe integration. In fact, this is now so straightforward, it really boils down to 2 API requests. They first make a request off to the Sources endpoint with payment details specific to whatever payment method their customer wants to use. So that first one, if you can read it in the back, you might not, is an example of creating a source for Ideal. So you provide the bank name and then the return URL, which is the URL for the developer's website for them to be redirected back to. That's sent to Stripe, where we safely tokenize and store that information, which also means that the developer server never has to see important payment details, so they don't have to worry about PCI compliance or safely and securely storing payment details. We have to worry about that at Stripe. The developers don't. And so then after that, Stripe sends back a reference to this source, and the developer can create another charge request like we saw before and use that payment method. It's that simple. Additionally, one thing that we also wanted to make sure was that our developers could grow with us as Stripe grows. New payment methods are seemingly popping up overnight, and at Stripe we're working hard to get them integrated as fast as possible. If a developer wants to use a new payment method, they simply have to go to their dashboard, click an Activate button, and then they can proceed to use the Sources endpoint for that method. That's as easy as integrating your payments should be, and also growing and maintaining your API should not have to go and have you go back and rewrite your existing integration. It should really just be as easy as upgrading it with a click of a button. So that was an early example of how we had to respond to a very real-world situation by creating an API. We couldn't go into all of these markets and force everyone to use the same payment method just to make it easy for us to operate our API. Payments are cultural, people pay in different ways. That was the reality that we had to work with, and so in response, we built an endpoint to try to help solve that. Nowadays, we have these kind of a span or growth of marketplaces, and the sharing economy is creating these really interesting business models. You can think of like Lyft, Airbnb, Postmates, Zipcar, and we were hearing from merchants like this that they wanted an easy way to enable their users to make transactions on their behalf. So you can think of a delivery service. They wanted their delivery people to be able to go, pick up an order, pay for it, and not have to worry about reimbursements or handling that. So that was what inspired us to create Issuing, which was that product that I just mentioned before, which is a way for developers to programmatically create and manage credit cards all with an API and draw the balance from their Stripe account. So I'm going to get a little more into how we had to build a developer experience to provide insight to these very real-world, tangible APIs. We're no longer talking about charges on the network. We're talking about real credit cards here. And to do that, though, I think the best way to understand the Stripe developer experience is to experience it as a developer. So I'm going to jump out of the slides and actually go into a demo of how someone could integrate Issuing and get a better understanding of some of the tools that we create for our developers. Okay, step one, the home page. For Stripe, it's easy to sign up and get started. You just need to, you can self-service and create your Stripe account and start processing payments as soon as you put in your company information. So I'm already logged in, and I can go to my dashboard. The dashboard is a very important part of our developer experience, even though it's not obvious right away. What this does is it gives a view into all of your Stripe data, so you can see payments coming through, get an overview of graphs, and this helps developers, because often with API providers, APIs can be a black box where all the data is stored there. And if you have people in your company who want to maybe see information about a payment, refund a customer, they might have to bother their developer to get access to that data, to read or write or make one-off requests. So with the Stripe dashboard, what we have is a beautiful UI that's built directly on top of our API that anyone can go in and edit and change the data. So the dashboard helps relieve developers of having to do those one-off requests inside work. And it's also very useful for building new products. So I'm going to open Issuing. And if I was a developer who wanted to get started with any new product at Stripe, there are a couple resources you can turn to. One is we make sure to have very robust documentation. You can see that this almost reads like a story. Here is a whole page about testing your Stripe Issuing integration. There's also pages that give an overview, how to issue cards, cards management. And what we try to do is we break it down into very clear steps, literally calling out step one and then any associated request that comes with that. What we also do is we have real live working code snippets embedded directly in our documentation for all of our client libraries. So if I click on any of these tabs, you can see them generated in that preferred language. We also have direct links to our API reference. And the API reference is the raw documentation of the actual requests and responses that you can read. And so for me, I think this is great for developers because it gives different views of the same information. So if a developer prefers to read the raw reference, they can go right there. But for other developers who want more of a story and explanation of how to really build out these features, that's what our docs are for. Two flavors of similar information. One thing you might notice is that in my documentation, I actually have a test key embedded. And this is a secret key, but it's a test key, which is the only reason why I'm comfortable showing it to a large audience right now. Because at Stripe, we have our own test environment. That's this sandboxed version of our API that runs exactly like our API, except we don't charge the payment method at the end of it. Again, these are really real APIs that we're making, and we don't want to have a developer have to charge hundreds of dollars to their own credit card just to test that their integration is working. So for me personally, as a developer, I love using the test mode as just a way to play and explore around with the API because you can make requests and have no real consequences. So that's how I'm going to get started with Issuing. You can already see that I have a sample card, I have a sample card holder. But let's go ahead and make a new card. Does anyone want to give me a name? You won't? Miles? All right, Miles. Is that how you spell it? Cool. Last name? Davis. Let's make a new fictional person. Love it. Not so fictional. Okay, I'm just going to put in, actually, yeah, so we need an address. The reason why you need an address is if you were ordering a physical card for this person, this would be the address that you stored to have that card shipped. I'm going to just use the Stripe office. And submit. And I knew this was going to happen. Security is very important at Stripe. We log you out of your account all the time. So what I'm doing here after I authenticate is I just created a new card holder, and this UI runs on top of our API. So behind the scenes, it's the same kind of a create a card holder request that's going on. Actually, literally this request that I just had pulled up. But it's nice to do it in the dashboard when you're first starting out, so you don't have to worry about, getting the curl right or whatever. So now that I have my card holder, according to my documentation, I need to create a card. That makes sense. I can go into the dashboard and directly add a card for this user. I'm going to just do a virtual card for now. So what that does is it gives me a real credit card number that I can use online, but it's not going to actually print out a real card for me. Cool. So I have a real card. And step 3 is to create a source. This goes back to that sources endpoint that I was talking before. We can create a source with the ID of this issuing card and then create an uncaptured charge. This just tests out the flow of the card, but without ever actually processing it or charging it. So what I actually did before this talk to save time was I made some test endpoints in Postman. Postman, for those of you who don't know, is a client that helps you easily write and reuse API requests and responses and save them. This is a great developer tool that a lot of developers like to use. And at Stripe, one thing we make sure of is we have a published open API spec of our entire API that a developer can actually import into a tool like Postman and see a whole list of all of the 90 different API requests that we have. And this enables them to just be able to have even more of a frictionless experience testing out your APIs, because they can import it into this tool or any other tool that can parse that format and get started. Little touches like that really save developers time and can help them get more acquainted with your API. Anyways, I have this this real request for making a source, and what I need is the issued card ID that I can paste here, send that off, and you can see in my response, it's a bit cut off on the screen, but I get a source back, and this has all the information about it, but the only thing that I'm concerned for right now is the ID of this source to make that test charge. So I'll copy that, go to create test charge. I have an amount and a currency, and I'm setting capture to false, so it doesn't actually capture this charge, which doesn't really matter because it's in test mode. Sending that, and ooh, we get an error. If I can make this bigger to show that error. Nope, okay. So if you can see, oh, there we go, it scrolls, perfect. So I get an error back from Stripe's endpoint saying that the card was declined. If I was a developer playing around, I'd be like, what? I followed your instructions exactly, and this is what you give me. But at Stripe, in the dashboard, we have the ability to get real transparency into what's going on behind the scenes, so it's easy for you to debug in these situations. I'm going to go to the Authorizations tab, and you can see here that I have this closed authorization that was just made by Miles Davis. If I click on this, scroll down, there's an event that was logged that is saying that it was declined because the card wasn't active. And that's right, because I made the card in the dashboard and I forgot to activate it. With issuing, it's easy for you to activate and deactivate these cards. You can use an API request, or you can actually do it from the dashboard. You can see if I go back, it has that inactive, but all I need to do to activate the card is click that button. We should be good to go. Those error codes are really important because, as I mentioned before, payments are very complicated and a lot of things can go wrong. And often a lot of things go wrong that aren't a developer's fault. Someone puts in a wrong CVC code for their credit card, or maybe there's a subscription that has a reusable source on it that has expired. These events are going on all the time, and it's important to give our developers as specific information as we possibly can. So we actually have over 80 different error codes to inform developers of all of these situations, whether it was something that they did or something that their user caused. Not only does this create a better developer experience, but it ultimately creates a better customer experience because these developers are able to elevate these errors up to their users, help them debug what's going on, and maybe make the checkout experience a lot smoother. So error messages are great. If you have an API, do not underestimate the importance of really clear, straightforward error codes, because it just helped me debug that one right there. Cool. So I'm going to create a new source. Right now we have to create a new source every time we want to test one of these cards. So go back, do that, get the response from that, and let's see if this charge works. Woohoo! We got the charge back as our response, which means that it successfully went through. And I can verify that by looking at my authorizations again, and I can see that I do have this pending charge that will never be captured because I set capture to false, but it was approved due to my authorization controls. And authorization controls is another new feature that comes with issuing, and this lets us set specific controls for our credit cards, all with an API call. I can go to the docs, dig in a little bit about authorizations, and down here, we can get a nice overview about setting these authorization controls. We can set allowed categories and blocked categories. This refers to merchant category codes that each business who accepts credit cards has to have. We have a whole list posted on Stripe of these categories, and you can get super specific and make cards that only work at aquariums, for instance, if you really wanted to. I would personally get that card. So yep, categories, max amount, which is just the max amount that can be charged to that credit card. Also a number of max approvals. So let's say you create a credit card that you only want to be able to be used 10 times. You can set that. You can combine all of these. You can leave all of these out. It's very flexible. So let's update this card and set a max amount on this credit card for $20 just to test. So what I'm doing is I'm posting to this exact credit card by using its ID, and then I can set authorization controls to max amount and give it a value. And this is going to be in cents if I'm using dollars, so 2,000 is equivalent to $20. Let's send that. And in my response, I can see that I have a max amount of 2,000, so I know that this card has been updated, and now in theory, it should block any charge that's over $20. So let's create another source, use this to create a test charge, and bump this up to $24. And if everything works, the card was declined. So this has now been blocked for anything over $20. If I try doing something under $20, we get a successful, nope, that's because I didn't change the value. Jumping ahead of myself. Let's say 19. That successfully went through because it's under 20. So these kind of controls give flexibility for developers to do whatever they want with their API. But we actually want to make this API as flexible as we possibly can without having our security team hate us. So one thing that we added was the ability to control your authorization controls with webhooks. And for a webhook, what a webhook does is it lets developers respond to offline events with online actions. And Stripe, it's really important because all of those situations I mentioned before, there are a lot of offline events happening when it comes to payments. You might have your customer trying to refund a charge, or maybe they are they needed, their subscription ran out and they wanted to update it. All of these things are happening outside of the developer's app in the real world. So webhooks give us a way to send events to developers' applications and have them respond to these events in real time. So here what I have is a webhook endpoint. This is a simple Node app. And I'm going to have this webhook check to see this is my fake Pro Travelers account, like let's say I'm doing employee expense cards. So I only want to issue and allow transaction for cards when my employee is on a trip. And right now I just have a very mocked class pretending that my employee is on a trip, but you can imagine having an API call to your own service that does a lookup to see whether or not that employee is on a trip. Or you can get even more custom than that. So here, I get the auth, I get the transaction, I look up the employee, and then this is the real logic of the entire process. First, I'm checking to see if my authorized amount is under $25 and if my employee is out on a trip. If it is, then let's approve that authorization, and I make this call to the approve endpoint. Otherwise, I'm going to decline it and then send an acknowledgement that this webhook responded. So let's get this up and running. And the way to connect our webhook is to expose it online and link it to under settings and issuing. This is where we can put the endpoint for all of our authorizations to hit. That means any charge that's made with a credit card will hit this endpoint first before approving or declining. And it's important, actually, that you have your endpoint respond in less than 2 seconds. Otherwise, we'll time it out, because you can imagine if someone's paying for something and it's taking more than 2 seconds to decide whether or not to approve that charge. It's a very real-world delay. So there's logic here that lets you decide whether to approve or reject it just by default. So I'm going to say approve it by default, save this endpoint, and let's test this again, but try to make a charge now that is under, let's see, my authorization controls is $25. Let's do it more than 25 and get this rejected. 26, and I'll move this to the side, move this to the side. Did I replace that source? And my button is here. All right, we declined, but we did not hit the webhook, and that's because, oh, it's because I actually had that previous, those previous controls set here. So let's clear this and try that again. So I cleared the previous authorization controls I set on that card, and we'll create a new source, create a test charge, and now it's declined through our webhook. So this actually hit our webhook, and based on the logic, because it was $26 and we're saying only approve things that are under $25, it rejected it. So this is a way you can get very, very custom and have a lot of control over exactly who you want, what kind of authorizations you want going through. And again, flexibility is really great for APIs, because I think this will enable a lot of businesses that we didn't even think of when building this product originally. Another thing I want to show off is our developer dashboard. So we have the dashboard for all of our products, but we came out with the developer dashboard this year because we realized that while the dashboards were really nice for those one-off requests, it wasn't actually giving developers information about their day-to-day integration. So here is a dashboard built just for developers that gives an overview of the health of their integration. We have what API versions you're using, which it's actually easy to use multiple API versions at Stripe. If you have different client libraries or maybe using a plugin that uses an old API, we're constantly pushing upgrades to our API versions, but they're opt-in and backwards compatible, so we don't want to break the developer's existing integration and contribute to those 17 hours of pain. So it's always, when there's an upgrade available, you can click this button. I can preview it in live mode. And it gives you a list of changes made since your last version, so you get a really clear idea of what you're getting into when you upgrade your version. Again, clarity and transparency to developers is really important. You don't want to have them upgrading it or actually forcing them to upgrade it and then breaking their existing integration. So that's the API version. The next set is actually a graph, 4 different graphs that we have that just show the overall health of your Stripe integration. This is easy for us to build because all of these API requests are hitting our servers, and we don't want to have developers to have to take the time to build observability just into their own Stripe integration. So we expose a couple of graphs that we think would be helpful for developers. The first 2 have to do with your API requests, so the successes and the errors coming in, which makes sense. I have errors if I'm testing issuing right now. And the API error distribution, so we can see exactly where these errors happened, like with sources. And every single API request that comes through Stripe is logged and available in a request log that has a beautiful UI on top of it that gives developers complete insight to the request and response that happened. So here was, did I do this today? I think I did this today. I created this error because I was using the wrong ID for a source. And it gives you all the information you could want, including IP address, the fact that I was serving it from Postman. But the most important part is that we give the developer the body and the response body of that request so that they can see exactly what was going on and can troubleshoot things quickly. The next section is also about events. Again, webhooks are a really integral part of Stripe, and we want to make it as easy as possible for developers to understand what events are coming, or we're sending them. So we log every single event that goes through with similar kind of information about what kind of data was sent to their server. So here is an example of a charge. This was charge failed because my card rejected it. There's a whole set of webhook events that you can listen to. Let's update details. Ranging from updates about accounts on the Stripe merchant to everything about your charges, coupons, I mean, you name it, you can listen to that event. Okay, I'm feeling pretty good about my issuing integration, so I think I'm ready to flip it live and try to make a real charge. I'm going to use this as a real example of a pro traveler's credit card that I made last night, or actually delivered yesterday. It's active right now. I'm going to try to hide the number so you guys can't buy things off Amazon right now. But what I want to do is I want to set a limit on this and then try to make a charge with it in the real world. So I'll take the ID. I'm going to create a live source. Or actually, I just want to update this source to use different authentication controls. So I'm going to use this source's ID. I don't need to make a live source. Set a max amount of $20. Let's send that over. All right, it looks like that we set that max amount. Now I'm going to go to a real website and try to buy something online and make sure that it worked in the same way. This is me sanity checking the exact flow that I was able to do in test mode, but in the real world. So I want some cookies because it's been that kind of a day. Let's do delivery. I'm really new to Postmates. So this is our favorite bakery that we've ordered many times for demos. You can already see I ordered it last time. He was great. Cool. So let's see, I set the max amount to $20, so I'm going to order something more than that. Let's try to get 16 cookies. Add to cart, check out. So in theory, this charge should be blocked from my real credit card. Click that as soon as possible, or maybe after my talk. No, let's just do that. I'm going to enter this in, so you will see this card, but I'll know if you make any charges because of Stripe's great transparency into what's happening behind the scenes with our API. And, oh, right. 1021. Okay, so this is more than $20. Saving this as a payment source. This is, again, a real live card. Confirm. Looks good. Let's continue. Uh-oh, an error has occurred. That's because my card was just declined. But I do want some real cookies, so I'm going to go back to my order and make sure that I'm under $20 because that is the kind of mood that I'm in. Postmates, stop. Okay, X, cool. Let's add just a couple of cookies. Share some with my team. And let's do a hazelnut one more, just 4. There's so much free food here, I don't know why I'm actually doing this. Okay, but I'm doing this to prove a point, that's what I'm doing. So now we have a total that's under $20. Let's do that. place an order. Voila, now it works. So programmatically controlling API or credit cards with APIs sounds really cool, but if you don't have a developer experience to help users build it and create an easy to use tangible API integration, it becomes really hard. You don't want to have developers putting in work just to understand what's going on with your integration. Flip back to the slides. I mean, now I have 15 minutes to finish this before my Postmates comes, so I'll try not to rush through. But we went over a lot of information, so I just wanted to give some real tangible things about generally what we try to think about at Stripe when we're building these developer experiences for the real world. Useful design for error codes. This helps developers identify the problem immediately, not have to call into your support to figure out what's going on. You're helping yourself just by creating good error codes. Online responses for offline events. We manage this with webhooks, but you can also imagine trying to have good offline experiences with service workers and all the other tools that are available today. Dynamic and personalized documentation, even as something as embedding a user's API key into the docs, makes a really delightful experience. And you know that sometimes docs aren't the most delightful things to read, so having a little bit of fun can help people really understand your API. Reliability, transparency, and support. These things are obvious, especially when you think about how for API providers, you are that single integration towards a lot of work for developers, so you are a single point of failure. If you go down, they go down. Being as reliable as you can and transparent about when that happens through good status pages or a proper support team is really important. Robust and flexible testing framework. In Stripe's eyes, that looks like our test mode, but there's lots of ways you can provide a really engaging testing experience for your developers, and that eventually helps them learn how to actually use your API. Easy to use interfaces for the API. Don't make using your API difficult, whether it's through the actual abstractions you create or even just giving them dashboards to let them do one-off requests simply. Backwards compatible API updates. Don't push an API version that will break everyone's integration. That will contribute to those 17 hours of pain and frustration. So be as backwards compatible and thoughtful as you can be when pushing updates for your API. And the last one is just bigger ideas and tools to drive success. When we create these products like issuing, we're responding to these real world situations that we're hearing from our developers on the ground, but we do this in a way where we hope that they surprise us and use it in ways that we never thought that they would actually use, because then that inspires us to create the next thing. So the obligatory we're hiring slide, if any of these challenges sound interesting to you, if you want to join us to help create products or experiences to bring the 17 hours of developer toil down, we're hiring in lots of places. Otherwise, we'll be here the rest of Signal. We have a booth set up Wednesday and Thursday, so come on by. We're right by the coffee cart, so you know it's a good location. And thank you.
Are there any questions? Oh, we got lots.
Yes.
I'm sorry, he was up first.
Okay, I noticed you had examples in various code. Mm-hmm. So are those considered part of the API, or is that, because I know Twilio calls those SDKs, and then you have the REST API.
Yeah.
So you can document things in terms of HTTP, or document it in terms of the language, which means dealing with all the quirks of the language.
Yeah, so we have, you'll notice the first one is just the basic request that's documented, but then the rest of them are for our SDKs, or we also call them our client libraries as well, just to make it easier if developers are using that language to be able to copy and paste, but we always start, the reference itself is the one that has the raw sample requests and responses as well, so it's language agnostic.
So are those libraries open source?
Yeah, they are. We have all of those client libraries right now.
Yeah, because I know like Ruby, there's like half a dozen gems.
Yeah, on top, and people build things on top. Yeah. Yes. But it brings up a good point too, because we have all of our client libraries, and then it's great because people build things on top of that, and now we have a whole ecosystem full of tools that people have built for people who use Stripe. So we're enabling developers, it's very meta, we're enabling developers to build for us and create, whether it's like useful tools for specific languages that we might not have time for. But yeah, we manage a set of 6 or 7 core client libraries. Yeah.
Thank you for the talk. It was excellent. A question about the Open API version. You're using not using version 3, is that right? Because I don't think Postman supports it.
Yeah. So, and I think that was version 1. Then there's something kind of weird with the way that was laid out. But
okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Because I'm just wondering if there has been any discussion with your team about whether it's useful to go to Open API 3.
Yeah.
Has that been something that's compelling? You're like, no, 2 is fine, and all the tools pretty much support that one.
Yeah, I'm actually not sure. I haven't overheard that yet internally, but I'm
Okay.
sure it's bound to come up because we just want to be able to support as like the latest and greatest cutting edge, even if it might mean taking a risk. But I'll actually bring that question back to our dev prod team.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just curious. I've integrated with Stripe before, and one of the big issues was always there's getting it working on your desktop, and then there's getting it working in a production environment where you're pushing thousands of transactions out, and a lot of times the API documentation tends to focus on the initial getting it working part and not the getting it working in your production environment in terms of how you should approach the API.
Yeah.
What's being done in those areas?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I would love to talk with you offline about that because I think that raises a good point, right? It's one thing to get off and running, but then how do you maintain and scale your integration is something that we've talked about as a team that could use more resources. So I'd love to hear specifically what problems you guys faced. That was a very non-answer for you, but like, it's a good question.
All right, we have time for one more question. Does anyone else have a question?
Are you looking into developing APIs for other types of payment methods like checks, wire transfers, ACH transactions, et cetera?
Yeah, so I believe we do ACH, right? Yeah, looking at some employees. Though that wasn't an exhaustive list that I showed right there. That was just an example of kind of the hardest points to scale. But yes, we're always looking for new payment methods, especially internationally, because there's so many out there. But we currently support ACH. It's changing every day.
Anything with the wire transfers?
I'm not sure. I'll have to double check that on you, but. Yeah, we're always adding to it. Cool. We can do one more if people want. I'll stick around.
Does anyone else have a question? Oh, seems like no. All right, thank you so much.